back to the Lanark QC podcast hosted by the Young Reporters Group. I'm Ainsley, your host today, and we have a special guest. Please welcome Margaret McDonald. Margaret is a Scottish author who lives in Glasgow. Her debut novel, Glasgow Boys, was published in May 2024, which has received many positive reviews. Glasgow Boys is a story of Banjo and Finlay, two young men who grew up in care and now are trying to make their way into their own widows of university lives, high school, work and relationships. Margaret, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you so much, and thank you for your lovely introduction. You did brilliant. How are you, Ainsley?
Good, thanks.
Good.
The first question is, what's made you want to become an author?
Wow, that's a really good question, and I think a lot of authors often get asked this question because obviously when you sort of have a finished book, people want to understand, how that comes about. A lot of authors have the same answer as me, which is I've always loved stories, I've always loved reading. Obviously went on to actually study English and reading at university. So while I was at university, there's a sort of course that you could pick, and it was creative writing, and it sort of really opened my eyes to the fact that I could create stories, I didn't just have to read them, and that was so much more fun for me. It was like reading on hard mode or something. It was really difficult but so rewarding when you had your own characters and your own story. So I think that university really opened my eyes to the possibility of being a writer, and obviously when you study at university as well, your tutors will read your work, you'll have peers that are also writers, and having that community of writers, forming those relationships with like-minded people was really important for me as a writer, to sort of have that relationship with other people who enjoyed stories as much as me and could give me feedback. Getting feedback on my books and on my writing is such a special feeling, it's wonderful to connect to readers and people who have enjoyed the book, which is what made me actually want to publish Glasgow Boys and put it out into the world and connect with people, especially Scottish readers and Scottish people, Scottish youth. So thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Lucy.
Did you put a part of yourself into the book?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think especially for fiction, because it's not an autobiography, so it's not based on my real life, there's always that desire to explore a different mindset or a different world, a different perspective and lived experience, but definitely did put a lot of myself into Glasgow Boys. Specifically, one of my characters, Alina, has a bowel operation that I actually had when I was 19, so I'm 26 now, which was a long time ago. And obviously Finlay is studying to become a nurse. So I studied English, but after the pandemic I went on to work with the NHS just as an admin officer, so that's like a receptionist, and it was really tough but rewarding. I really wanted to champion the nurses that I met, and especially even after my bowel operation who had really helped me as well recover. And with Banjo actually, he suffers from something called drug dependency, which is not addiction, it's just you become tolerant on a drug that you've been taking for a long time and you can experience withdrawal if you don't take it. So I actually experienced that after my bowel operation. I became dependent on painkillers, so I would get really bad headaches and feel a bit sick if I didn't take them. So it took me a good few years to get over my drug dependency, and I put that experience onto Banjo because I wanted to explore it and sort of raise awareness to that dependence that can happen on drugs that's not maybe discussed as much as addiction. So there's quite a few bits of myself and my life in Glasgow Boys, but I do think that Banjo and Finlay are very different to me, which was part of why writing the book was so fun, because you get to, explore a different way of reacting that you would never do, and it can be really exciting to do that. Thank you for your question.
Your second question is, can you relate to any of your characters?
Yeah, I think with Finlay specifically, he's the character that I relate to the most, because Finlay starts university at 18 and he doesn't know anybody. He's not got any of his friends with him, and that was my experience. I didn't go to a university that my friends were going to, and I wasn't even studying a course that my friends were doing. I went on and did English literature, and a lot of my friends went on to do maybe accounting or science, medicine, things like that. I was totally on my lonesome, struck and stranded, in Glasgow city centre, and I feel like that experience was really like character building for me, like because I made a lot of relationships maybe that I wouldn't have made had I gone to university with my friends, and I wanted that experience to be relayed in Finlay as well. Like I wanted Finlay to have that experience of, you know, it's really anxiety inducing to start university when you don't know anyone, but it can also be like such an amazing opportunity to meet people that you might not have met. So yeah, I can't say I relate to banjo. Banjo suffers a lot of anger issues and things, and I think for me like that was something that I wanted to explore, specifically because it's a response to his trauma that he's experienced, and it was something that I wanted to explore but sensitively. So in order to do that, I hired somebody who they would be called a sensitivity reader. It's basically just someone who has been through the experience that you're writing about in fiction. Make sure that it's authentic, especially because you know, care experienced people are a community, you know, that you want to represent accurately. So I worked with a man who he had grown up in care homes, and he'd actually gone on to become a child psychologist. So he was an amazing insight to get, and I would recommend if you're writing about an experience that you maybe don't have, that you want to make sure is authentic, to definitely like go out into the world and maybe like search around and see if you can find a reader or an editor who, you know, would read your book. You know, I definitely paid. His name was John Rideau, because it's a service, you know, it's the same as like editing. It's hard work to read a book and go through it all and like make sure that it's authentic, especially because obviously it's fiction as well. Like it's not my real life, but it was something that I wanted to make sure was accurate. In that regard, I can't relate, but there's other things that you can do maybe if you don't relate to an experience of your character. Thank you, Lizzie. Oh, no, of course, thank you.
Why did you want to write from the perspective of two young people?
Very good question. So for me, like when I started writing Glasgow Boys, I was actually writing it during the pandemic. So I was high risk, which meant that like I was someone who, if I got COVID, because there was no vaccine at the time, it would have really impacted me. I have Crohn's, I'm immune suppressed, and I have asthma. So a bit of a concoction of illnesses and disabilities that meant that, yeah, as I said, had I got it, it would have been pretty bad. So I was shielding in my house, which meant that I wasn't actually allowed to go outside at all, which was pretty rough. I was shielding for 5 weeks. I had to get my sister to come up and like give me food in a tray, which was mad, and she had to like wipe it down with cleaning stuff. So when I started Glasgow Boys, I think I couldn't really envision so much like a future specifically for myself, because I was still a student. I was doing my masters from home. I was sort of attending lectures online, and it was just really difficult for me to think, what am I going to do like after I graduate? Like, where am I going to go? I didn't even know what kind of job I would have. At the time I was unemployed, which I think it was, as I said, it might have been 2021, because I started my master's degree right after I finished my undergrad. So still living at home, like a bit adrift. So I kind of just wanted to almost go backwards in a way, and like to a time and a place where life felt a bit more normal for me, and I could draw on those experiences as well of like being young. As I said, like I drew a lot on my own experience of university, and I wanted to go and work with the NHS after I left, or after the pandemic ended, and I managed to leave my room, and that was really eye-opening as well, and that's something that I sort of edited back into the book, a lot more about the NHS, which wasn't massively a part of it the first draft. So I think sometimes people think, well, you've finished the book and hit, you know, end, and you've not touched it, but actually went back quite a lot and edited it. So yeah, like 4 years ago in 2020 was when I first was writing Glasgow Boys, and obviously up to now a lot has gone through the novel that I've edited it, and it's changed quite a bit, but in terms of why I wanted to write for young people specifically, I think I just wanted to re-experience that normality for myself, and yeah, like obviously explore what it was like to go to university. I actually didn't manage to go to Glasgow University in person at all. Like I had to do my whole master's degree online, so that's why I put Finlay in Glasgow University. I just plopped him in there and just did Google Maps and walked around the streets virtually as if I was there. It was a sort of wish fulfillment that I wanted to do, but I couldn't actually experience, so I just did it fictionally through my fictional world. But yeah, thank you so much for your question, it was really good.
Thank you.
So Margaret, how do you find your inspiration for your books?
Great question, Leonard. Honestly, sometimes it just comes with the wind and there's like no rhyme or reason. I would say to anyone aspiring to be an author and to be a writer, there is absolutely no formula, or especially like creating a novel, and the creative process itself is so unique, and it should be something really like freeing and joyful, that you don't feel like bound to certain conventions of like, okay, it has to include this. And I know a lot of authors might think, what's trendy right now, I'll just go for that, and maybe that'll get published. But I would disagree and obviously say that writing is such a personal act, and it can definitely like be a struggle to find ideas. But when you have an idea that you're really attached to, and especially characters, so for me, like it comes with a character. I'll think about a person and what they're like, and then I'll sort of build a story around that person, and I want to explore what their childhood was like, what were their parents like. With Banjo and Finlay, specifically, I wanted to explore their relationship. So for me, with Banjo and Finlay, it came about from this notion of, I wonder, because when my partner works in social services, and I know that there's maybe like not a saying, but he said that the people that you want to look out for in a classroom are the noisy, disruptive kid and the quiet one, because there's not really something going on at home with either of them, just it manifests in different ways. And I thought to myself, like, I wonder what those two characters, like what their relationship would look like and how they would sort of get along, and that's what gave birth to Banjo and Finlay as people. I wanted to put them in a situation where maybe they were forced to share a room or forced to get to know one another, and obviously thought that the group home and foster care would be a really great setting for that, and a really like interesting dynamic would be born from them. And from that, I wanted to explore their life and where they went from there. So I think, yeah, in terms of getting inspiration, or like where does it come from, sometimes it can just be like something that somebody said, or something that like sparks your interest. You might be watching a movie or TV show and think, oh, like that idea is interesting, and you'd quite like to take it further. When I was a reader and I wasn't really writing at the time, like I'd read books and I'd think to myself like, oh, I really wish like we got to know more about that person or more about that relationship. And I think that's just like natural of anyone. Like I think everybody is a little bit creative, and everyone has those little sparks of ideas, and it just takes like developing it and fleshing it out and kind of following it. But yeah, thank you for your question.
Was it difficult to write about mental health?
Wow, yeah, that's a great question, Jaden. It's something that I've struggled with, my mental health. As I said, when I started university, I suffered social anxiety, and I actually have PTSD from a car accident that I was in when I was 11. So, my mental health has been a huge part of my life, and it's something that it felt really natural to write about almost, and it felt as though, specifically with what Banjo and Finlay had been through, it was really important to show the way in which that had impacted them mentally and emotionally, and not just physically. Like trauma is manifests in a lot of ways, as I said, and for Finlay it manifests in a sort of self-isolating way, and for Banjo it manifests in a way of like lashing out with anger. And I feel like both of those reactions are equally as valid and equally deserve like attention and representation almost. But I think for me, as someone who really does know a lot about mental health in terms of my own, because it's something that I've suffered and struggled with, and I know a lot of people have struggled with it, I think it felt really natural to discuss it, and it feels really natural to be open about it and talk about it, because I think that it's really important to be open about your mental health.
And was it hard writing as a young author?
Yeah, great question. I think it was quite hard. You do experience, how would you say, people being, I don't even know how to word it, but sometimes people can think that because you're young you might be immature, and specifically with young adult literature, and that's children's literature, I do think that people often look down on children's literature as not as hard or difficult to write. write as adult literature, which I disagree. You know, I don't think that that's the case. It's for a different audience, of course, but it's the same process. You're writing a book. So I don't really understand those kind of viewpoints, but I suppose it's just a difference of opinion. But I have experienced people who might look down on children's literature and also have sort of negatively experienced the book because it was for a YA audience. And as you know, I'm a young author, as you said, and YA literature feels really natural to me to write because it's sort of the closest experience that I can draw from. I can't draw from my 30s and 40s, I'm not there yet. So for me, I love writing YA literature, I love reading YA literature, but I have experienced like people being negative about that because they don't think that it is tough to do, which is strange. I don't really understand why.
Do you like being an author, and is it your dream job?
Great question, Caroline, thank you. I love being an author. I would love it to be my full-time job, but myself and many authors who do end up getting published with their first novel at least often have a sort of job, a full-time job sometimes, or a part-time job that they do alongside being an author, or at least writing books. And it's because being an author is really tough. It's tough to get published, I think, because of the length of time it takes. So with Glasgow Boys, I finished it in about 2021, and I found my agent, who is somebody who represents your work. They're like a lawyer basically. They go out to publishing houses and they pitch you, which means they say, would you like to publish this book? And they make sure that all the legal things are like, you know, the publishing house can't take too many rights off you, which means that like they can't turn it into a theme park and you don't get any money, which is the dream, but oftentimes doesn't happen, obviously. To get an agent is really tough, and then it took me about a year of pitching the book to get an agent, and then once I got my agent, it took about 5 months of my agent Rachel pitching Glasgow Boys to publishing houses before they wanted it. And then actually I had to edit it with my publisher, who are Favour, for a year. And that was a really great experience. I'm really glad that we did that because it takes a village obviously to make a book and make one like really good and make sure that the grammar is correct. Like there were a lot of things that I think if you're just working on it yourself, you'll become a wee bit blind to. So we edited it for a year and then you market it for 6 months, and I think after that time period has passed, it's obviously been about two years, maybe more. And I think that means that it's not really like a livable job. It means that like when you get paid for being an author, the payment is actually like 2 years late in a way, and you've obviously had to be working during that time. So I was working all throughout, my agent pitching me to publisher houses, and I was working all throughout. I was working a 9 to 5 job, which, you know, started at 9 in the morning, finished at 5 at night. And when I was doing edits for Glasgow Boys, my publisher would like send me them and say, you've got 2 weeks to finish this round of edits, and I would just sit at the weekend, like from 9 in the morning till like midnight almost, and just have to like rush through all the edits because you do have to like squeeze in a lot of time, but it's worth it. I think that it's just, publishing is just a different form of work, but I do think that once you have a few books out, it means that the way that publishing works, and you've had a few books, say maybe like 3 books are out in the world and you're writing a 4th, you can support yourself from the money that you've made off those 3 books. But while you're waiting on your first book coming out, it's almost impossible to support yourself from your writing because you're not getting actually paid at that point. You only really get paid once the book comes out. So hopefully, ideally, like in the future, it would be a full-time job and I could leave my 9 to 5, even though I do really like my 9 to 5. But I think it just depends on personal circumstance and like how you can support yourself. I mean, I've been lucky that I can live with my parents. I could live with my parents all throughout the pandemic when I didn't even have a job, and I wasn't able to work because I lost my job. I was working in a cafe, so the cafe's all shut. I think it all just depends, you know, on how you can support yourself. I know a lot of authors maybe are able to be full-time for a lot of different reasons, but not me. But thank you. Ideally in the future, I'm an author. It is my dream job.
What authors do you look up to?
Oh yeah, there's so many. My favourite author is actually Japanese, and they're called Banana Yoshimoto. So they write really short books, and they're translated obviously into English. And they're often, I mean, one of my favourite novels of theirs is Kitchen, it's about a young woman who has lost her grandmother, and she didn't have any other family but her grandmother. So she sort of moves in with a family, and it's all about like the love of cooking and like how making food for people can be a real like act of love, and it's just a really beautiful book, and I love that book so much, and I go back to it a lot because I think that it really nails like the small intimate details of relationships, and I really love that, especially in Glasgow Boys. I wanted to nail sort of the small moments of connection. Banjo and Finlay specifically, like they don't know each other for a long time when they do meet, and they obviously they're like sharing a room but they're very distant and things, but this act of like Finlay caring for Banjo through Banjo's drug dependency, I really feel like it was inspired by Banana Yoshimoto, so I owe a lot to that author.
So why did you base your book in Glasgow?
Oh, great question, Patrick. Actually, initially this book was set halfway between Glasgow and halfway between London, and I think when I started the book I was really wary to write about Glasgow. I don't know, I think that I was just nervous to depict Glasgow as my hometown and depict it well. And I know a lot of people feel very strongly about Glasgow, they're very protective of it. The same goes with me. Whenever I like watch something that's got a Scottish actor, I'll be like, oh, they're Scottish. And whenever I read something that's Scottish, I'll think like, you know, how have they depicted Glasgow? And I think that's natural as someone who's native to here. But I had my friend from London read my version, which was split halfway between London and Glasgow, and she said, Margaret, you have to get rid of the London. It's not working, it's not authentic. I'd only been to London a couple of times, but she was like, this is not how London streets work, this is not how London transport works. So I thought, do you know what, like it is true that sometimes you should write what you know. I don't think that's true all the time. I think fiction can exist and be, you know, fantastical and magical and anything you want it to be, but I think that specifically if you're depicting like real places, it would be good to have experience from there. So I thought, I'm just gonna go fully Glaswegian, I'm just gonna like go for it. I found the experience like so rewarding and joyous, kind of be able to like write about places that I knew and streets that I knew. For any author maybe who is Scottish, like you do get like a sense of, is this going to be universal enough? Like, are people going to really want to read this book about a little tiny place in the UK? Because, you know, when you get published in the UK, your readers are mainly going to be English and potentially American, and obviously you want it to be understandable to them, and I think that is more of like a marketing thing that can bleed into your mindset a wee bit, and I had to definitely like get rid of it and just say, I want to write what I want to write, and I want to explore Glasgow, and I'd obviously wanted to depict Glasgow anyway, like halfway between Glasgow and London, because I thought it would be a good distance between Banjo and Finlay. But when I made it, you know, Glasgow itself, I felt as if the distance still worked. East Kilbride in Glasgow, it's like half an hour, but I think, yeah, I just wanted to write about Glasgow, and I'm really, really glad that I did. I'm really glad that I got rid of my nerves about depicting Scotland. Not to say that I feel as though Scottish people have been so supportive of Glasgow Boys specifically, and I've just had this like outpouring of love from my Scottish readers specifically, that I felt kind of silly about that nervousness, because Scottish readers are just so enthusiastic and passionate, and have been like one of the biggest highlights of the book, if not my life. Like the fact that they connected with the book and said, oh yeah, like, you know, that Scots phrase, like I say that and things, and like I really connected with like the university experience of Glasgowian things. So I'm so glad that I did.
Do you plan on writing more books? What's next?
Great question. I am always writing. So since Glasgow Boys published, which was in May this year, I've been writing another book that I'm hoping to get published, and it's Scottish. It's set between Glasgow and the Scottish Highlands of Glencoe, and it's actually about 4 kids who they sort of take on a summer job at a summer camp for about a month, and it's at like a sort of, you know, boarding school institution, but my 4 characters are working class, so there's a sort of like tension there, a bit of a conflict, and it's all about their relationships, and they're leaving high school, so they're wondering about what they want to do and things. I would say it's quite similar to Glasgow Boys. It deals with a lot of the same themes and issues of like growing up and being working class and being queer. So yeah, thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Have you written any books that have not been released or you thought was a massive fail?
Yeah. Full stop, yeah. So I have written 14 books in my whole life, and obviously I think that number speaks to them not all being good because you can't write that many books that are all masterpieces. I would say Glasgow Boys is actually my only success out of those 14 books, and it's just because writing, it's really writing is rewriting and editing and going over and over and over a book again. And then, as I said, like one of the major changes that I made with Glasgow Boys was that there was a version of it set between London and Glasgow, and that version of that book still exists, but it got scrapped. So I've always been writing, but it takes me, I'd say, 6 months to write a book on average. It takes me, from beginning of first page to the last page. Maybe the idea has been brewing for a little while. Maybe I've been thinking, okay, I'll do this and this and this, but when I start, it takes me about 6 months, and I really just bash it out. I just write every day. I'm kind of in a way that I can't look back at it. If I start looking back, I'll pick it apart, so I think I'll just keep going and finish it. And I think that means that I've been really prolific. I've had a lot of books. I've been really productive in that sense, but a lot of them haven't been very good. And when I finished Glasgow Boys, I really did know that it was the best book that I'd written. And I think you get to that stage as a writer and you think, do you know what, this one is the one, this one's the one that you want to pursue. But books before that, even though I said I've written 14, not all of them I wrote for publishing. Not all of them I wrote with the goal to publish. I wrote them to explore an idea or to go down a different avenue with another version of one of my books. So as much as failed as in I didn't publish them, I still see them as stepping stones onto Glasgow Boys. So they were all necessary to get to the end of end product of Glasgow Boys. Thank you for your question.
How did you find working for the NHS? Do you believe you have made a difference?
Right, wow, yeah, great question. I feel like I've said that to every question, but it's true. Working for the NHS was really, really rewarding and one of the best experiences of my life, even though it was equally one of the hardest, which seems quite contradictory, I guess, but sometimes that happens, sometimes an experience can be really contradictory. I did leave for health reasons, it wasn't viable for me. The journey also, I was working in Douglas Street Clinic in Hamilton, so it's not that far, but I don't drive, so the journey was about an hour there and back. Because I'm disabled and I have Crohn's disease, it's not the easiest on my body. I was having a lot of flare-ups, which means having a lot of symptoms and things while I was working on the job. It was also quite anxiety inducing, people would call and would be very angry for a lot of different reasons. And obviously when you work for the NHS, you're deeply aware that you're not working with the public, you're working with the sick public, which is a completely different experience. And you have to have compassion for people, even in their worst moments, because in some ways that might have been their worst day, their worst part of their week, you don't know. And we worked as well alongside community addiction recovery team, who were brilliant, but I did admin for the community addiction recovery team, and a lot of those phone calls were really tough, really emotionally draining, mentally draining. In a way, it's hard to know if you've made a difference, in retrospect. Obviously, I've had a lot of nurses and people who have worked in the care or healthcare system and also been through the healthcare system say that they really love Glasgow Boys for its depiction of the healthcare system. And that really, really means a lot to me. Yeah, as someone who deeply relies on it because I'm disabled and because it saved my life. When I was 19, I had to get a bowel operation. Unfortunately, there were complications with my operation, and I was sort of in high dependency unit and things like that, so it wasn't the easiest of times for me. But I deeply care about the NHS, and I care that it is represented well and that people understand. As much as it is very tough, it can also be such a positive place in a weird way. I think as well, for Finlay, it's a huge source of community for him and friendships, and he meets so many different people and he has so many experiences that really broaden his world and him as a person. He really comes out of his shell by working in the NHS, so that's something that happened to me and that's something that I wanted to depict.
Do your family and friends support your journey of being an author?
Yeah, good question. They do, they really do. I think it'd be tough if you had people around you who maybe dissuaded you from writing or trying to get your work published, which I know can happen for a lot of different reasons. Maybe they're writing an autobiography and their family don't want people to find out what they're like, but no, my parents and my fiancé, my brother and sister have been the biggest support. I actually dedicated the book Glasgow Boys to Caitlin, my sister, because I had essentially given up on this book. I'd moved on to another book and my sister was like, let me give it a read, because I was, you know, moaning to her about how hard it was to get published. And also just, it's really tough when you go back to a book that you've written and you see all of its flaws and you just think of it as a piece of hard work, as opposed to like a labour of love and something that you really enjoy creating, you know, like, or like, oh, this is going to take months to edit. But my sister was like, I'd really like to read it, so she read it in one night and she was like, Margaret, you definitely have to try and publish this. She was like, just don't give up. She was like, just try until like so many months, and then after that point, like, we can reassess, and like, maybe if you've written something that you prefer. I think it's because when I finished Glasgow Boys, I loved it more than any other book that I'd ever written. And I think my sister could tell, and she was like, I can tell that you feel really passionate about this book in particular. As I said, like, you know, I went to university at 18 and started creative writing then, so my parents and my family were all really aware that I was writing, and obviously did get an agent, did get a book deal, and I said, Caitlin, like, that never would have happened had you not read it and told me that you loved it, because I had completely just given up on it entirely. So that, you know, it can be absolutely like make or break if you have that support. And yeah, like, it just meant a lot to me. Like, me and my sister, like, I'll get a book or like buy a book and I'll be like, can you read this and tell me if it's good? I'll be like, Caitlin's my fact checker on like even if a book is worth the time it takes to read. So the fact that she loved my book and she was like, it was one of my favourite books ever, Margaret, it really meant a lot to me, because my sister's like my standard of quality. But thank you so much for your question, it's really good.
What type of books or genre of books do you like to read the most?
Good question. So many, all of them. I think for me, because I write contemporary, I really gravitate to contemporary, which is set in the real world, about, you know, real lives and real people. And I think as well, because I studied English literature, we studied like periods in time. So we studied the Enlightenment period, the Romantic era. Then I studied Soviet literature, which was so incredible, but it was really tough. The work was very tough. I mean, it was translated as well, which sometimes I think you lose a little bit of like nuance, but I found some of my favourite authors through that class actually. And I think studying English literature has taught me, you know, don't like disregard any genre and really go into reading with like an open mind, even if it's something that you wouldn't normally pick up or you've never even read before. And I know that it's such a sort of, you know, get a jail free card like answer, me saying that it really is all of them, but specifically do love contemporary. It holds a little piece of my heart, because obviously I wrote a book set in our contemporary world. I really love Scottish fiction. I think Scotland has a wealth of incredible writers. I don't know if that's a genre though, but in terms, you know, I would read romance, I would read fantasy, sci-fi, and I think all of those like genres and experiences can really inform you as a writer. And you might find something within like the historical genre that you can not take, but that like can inspire and inform your writing, even if you're writing in a completely different genre. But yeah, thank you for your question.
Thank you, Margaret, for joining us here on the Lanark UC podcast. It's been great having you. Go grab your copy of Glasgow Boys, which is out now in bookstores. Make sure you're following Margaret on our Instagram, Margaret McDonald offer. So make sure you're following the Lanark UC podcast on our social media channels, including TikTok, Instagram, YouTube and Spotify. Thank you for watching. Bye!